Diem never expected that a simple fever could change the rhythm of her quiet life. She was used to enduring things alone, illnesses, loneliness, long working days at the farm, all without complaint. But ever since Toan appeared, everything felt strangely different. That morning, just as the sun was lifting the dew from the leaves, her phone buzzed with his name glowing on the screen. She hesitated before answering, already guessing what was coming. "Have you taken your medicine?" he asked, voice firm yet gentle, the kind that left no room for lying. Diem laughed awkwardly and muttered an excuse, but Toan wouldn't let her off so easily. He scolded her with such seriousness that it made her cheeks burn, not from annoyance, but from a warmth she couldn't admit.
He reminded her over and over to eat properly, to wear a jacket when working, to stop pushing herself like she had no one to worry about her. His concern was so excessive, so oddly meticulous, that Diem didn't know whether to argue or melt.
She found herself clinging to every word, even though she responded with short replies as if she didn't care. But the truth was, her heart was beating far too loudly for someone who claimed indifference. Toan's care was overwhelming, almost unreasonable. Why would a man who wasn't even her lover behave like a devoted husband? She could feel embarrassment crawling up her neck, yet at the same time, a happiness she hadn't felt in years bloomed silently beneath her ribs. When the call ended, she stood frozen for a long moment, staring at her phone as if it had just cast a spell on her. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the silly flutter inside her chest, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't erase the smile tugging at her lips. Why is he like this? She wondered, half annoyed, half grateful. She whispered to herself, he's too thoughtful for his own good. Yet deep down, she wished he would never stop. While Diem tried to steady her emotions on the farm, Toan sat quietly at home, staring into his cup of warm milk, as if it held all the answers to his confusion. His mother watched him with knowing eyes. She had seen that expression before, on men who were no longer entirely their own. With a measured sigh, she asked casually, "Is that girl doing well?" Toan looked up, surprised, but he didn't hide her name. Instead, he spoke of Diem honestly about her strength, her loneliness, her habit of pretending she needed no one. He didn't describe her beauty, nor her voice, nor her smile. He spoke only of the quiet resilience that had humbled him. His mother listened without interrupting, but her heart was slowly softening. She had always imagined her son ending up with someone polished and secure, someone with a bright background and a proper family. Yet here he was, speaking with more sincerity than she had heard in years, all because of a girl who owned nothing but her courage. For a moment, his mother hesitated. The image of Diem as an orphan troubled her, not because she looked down on it, but because she feared her son might suffer from choosing a girl with no family to rely on. But then she saw the way Toan's voice softened whenever he mentioned her, and she realized something important. Loneliness recognizes loneliness, and perhaps that was why they gravitated toward each other. Instead of warning him, she simply said, "If she truly makes you better, then make sure you don't hurt her." Toan's fingers tightened around his cup, a silent promise forming in his chest. He didn't know what the future held, nor how Diem truly felt about him. But he knew one thing with unwavering clarity: he would rather risk everything than step back now. That night, he walked out of the house with a strange sense of determination. His mother watched silently from the window, sensing that something meaningful had already begun quietly, naturally, and perhaps unavoidably. The next afternoon, Diem was kneeling in the soft soil behind her small greenhouse, busy clearing out wilted stalks to prepare for the next round of planting. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh grass, familiar, quiet, safe. It was the kind of silence she was used to, a silence she once believed she preferred. But today, for some reason, it felt strangely empty. As she worked, her mind wandered back to Toan's voice from the morning call, stern yet impossibly gentle. She frowned at herself. Why am I thinking about him so much? She tried to focus back on her work, but her hands slowed. Was he serious? Or was it just his nature to care for everyone? No, he wasn't like that with others. So why me? That question gnawed at her, filling her with warmth and anxiety all at once. She didn't dare hope for anything more than simple kindness, and yet, every time he showed up, he made her heart tremble like she was on the verge of something she wasn't ready to name. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the footsteps approaching until a quiet voice spoke from behind. "You missed a spot." She jerked up so fast, she almost dropped her trowel. Spinning around, she found Toan standing there, leaning casually against the wooden fence as if he belonged there. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, hair slightly tousled from the wind. And he wore that maddeningly calm expression, the one that made her both flustered and angry for no reason at all. What are you doing here?" she blurted out, trying to hide the way her pulse jumped. "Inspection," he said coolly, as if it were the most natural answer in the world. Then, without asking permission, he stepped into the garden and crouched beside her. "You call this planting ground? These weeds are laughing at you." She glared, partly embarrassed, partly delighted, though she would never admit either. "I didn't ask for your opinion." "Good," he smirked. "I didn't plan to wait for it." Before she could protest, he snatched the hoe from her and began working the soil with practiced strength. She could only stand there watching, caught between indignation and awe. Why does he act like this? Why does he always do things without asking? Yet as she watched him silently laboring beside her, she realized something undeniable. His presence filled the empty spaces in her world so naturally that it frightened her. She tried to sound annoyed when she muttered, "You're unbelievable." But her heart whispered something far softer. "Don't stop." For a while, neither of them spoke. Only the rhythmic thud of the hoe striking the ground echoed in the quiet afternoon. Diem stood watching him, pretending to check the seedlings beside her, just so she wouldn't look too obvious. But no matter how hard she tried, her eyes kept drifting back to him, to the way his shoulders moved, to the sweat forming at his temples, to the absurd determination he had in helping her do something she never asked for. It was ridiculous, and yet, somehow, comforting. Finally, unable to stand her own silence, she muttered, "You really don't have anything better to do you?" Without looking up, Toan replied, "No, annoying you is at the top of my schedule." She scoffed, picking up the watering can just to have something to do. "Well, congratulations, you're very efficient at it." He didn't respond, at least not with words. Instead, he suddenly reached for the bucket beside her and grabbed a scoop of water, gently pouring it over the freshly turned soil. His hand accidentally brushed against hers, and though it was only for a fraction of a second, Diem felt as if someone had plugged a wire directly into her chest. She froze. He didn't. Without warning, he said quietly, too quietly, "Why don't you let people take care of you?" Her breath caught. She turned her head slowly, finding him already looking at her. There was no teasing smile this time. No smug expression. Just calm sincerity, and something dangerously close to affection. "I don't need," she began, but her voice came out shaky. "I know you can do everything yourself," Toan interrupted softly. "But that's not the same as letting someone want to do it with you." The world seemed to still around them. The wind paused, the birds hushed, even the soil beneath their feet felt like it was listening. Diem stared at him, unsure what emotion to grab onto. Embarrassment, annoyance, gratitude, fear. In the end, she settled for the one thing she always used to protect herself. She rolled her eyes and muttered, "You talk too much." But even as she said it, her heartbeat whispered the truth. "Please, don't stop." Toan didn't react to her eye roll. He simply watched her in silence, as if waiting to see whether she truly meant it. But Diem, stubborn as she was, refused to look at him again. She busied herself with the seedlings, planting them one by one with exaggerated focus, though her fingers trembled just enough to betray her. Without warning, Toan knelt beside her, so close that even the air between them seemed to tighten. "If you won't let me take care of you," he said quietly, "then at least, don't push me away when I'm already here." Her hands stilled. The dirt crumbled between her fingers. She didn't know what to say. She never knew what to say when he suddenly turned serious like this. It was unfair. One moment he was annoyingly cocky, the next he disarmed her with a single sentence. "You're dramatic," she muttered weakly. Toan didn't argue. He simply reached out hand before she could react. His thumb brushed away a smudge of soil left on her cheek. It was such a small gesture, but it felt like someone had just rung a bell inside her chest. Her breath caught. Her entire body went rigid, not out of fear, but from the overwhelming realization that she didn't want to move away. And that terrified her more than anything. She finally stood up abruptly, brushing off her knees. I'm going to get more water," she blurted, avoiding his gaze as if it could burn her. She walked away too quickly to be casual. Toan remained kneeling on the ground, watching her back as she retreated. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with the faintest smile tugging at his lips, he murmured to himself, "Run while you can, Diem. I'm still going to catch up." Sometimes, strength is not shown by doing everything alone, but by allowing someone to stand beside you. Diem had always believed that independence meant refusing help. She thought relying on others was a weakness, something to be ashamed of. Yet Toan, with his quiet persistence and excessive gallantry, taught her a different kind of courage, the courage to be vulnerable. Through his actions, she realized that kindness is not a debt one must repay, but a gift one must learn to receive. And love is not always loud or dramatic. It often appears in small gestures, like turning the soil for someone who is too tired to do it, or wiping away a smudge of dirt from their cheek without asking for anything in return. The true lesson is this: you don't lose your strength by letting someone care for you. You only gain another person's strength alongside your own.